Part 2. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 11. Snapped. A basin of water was deliberately poured in front of Subai, and some water droplets splashed on Subai's face. Suddenly, his whole body felt like he had broken free from the previous anxiety and tension. Didn't sleep. Chen Chu was only wearing a pair of underpants and was shirtless. When he spoke to Subai, he was obviously sullen, but he had restrained his emotions and no longer wanted to worry about what he had locked up before. Subai took a deep breath, and when he looked at Chen Chu again, he found that Chen Chu was a completely normal person. The blood and intestines seemed to be the same ones that he had been dazzled by before. However, Subai knew clearly that he was not dazzled. Subai did not consider everything that happened before to be something imagined by his own mind. He and Chu Zhao found the minced meat and head of Chen Chu's girlfriend together, and he saw with his own eyes the scene of Chen Chu being nailed to a chair when the door of the rental house was opened. It's not fake, it's really not fake. Own. It must be that damn terror broadcast, it must be that thing causing trouble. When Chen Chu came over with the wash basin, Subai subconsciously put the dagger into his sleeve. The light in the toilet was dim and it was late at night, so Chen Chu didn't notice anything unusual and just walked to Subai. Before go to the bathroom, Chen Chu asked. Subai nodded. Chen Chu walked sideways from Subai, probably going back to the dormitory. Subai walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, took some water and splashed it on his face, then breathed heavily into the sink, then stood up, the dagger in his sleeve pressed against his arm, although the touch was it's cold, but it can give yourself a feeling of dependence. Standing in front of his dormitory door, Subai hoped that this was a dream. After opening the door, Chen Chu would not be inside, and Lu He was already sleeping. However, Subai also knew that if all this was related to the horror broadcast, if so, then this dream will not be so easy to wake up from. I pushed the door open anyway. Inside, Chen Chu, who had just taken a shower, was changing clothes. Lu He was already lying on the bed ready to sleep. Subai blew into his wet bangs, climbed onto the bed, and closed the curtains. The dormitory soon regained its tranquility, and Chen Chu, who had changed his clothes, quickly lay down on his bed. However, Subai did not go to sleep. Instead, he secretly opened a small gap in the curtain and stared at Chen Chu diagonally downward. How could Subai sleep peacefully at this time? But Chen Chu seemed to be really sleeping, and gradually started to snore slightly. But Subai still didn't take it lightly. At this time, he really didn't feel sleepy at all. It was like someone was holding a knife on your neck. Do you still have the intention to go to sleep? For about an hour, Subai kept this action and his vigilant attitude. Subai clearly remembered the scene where the former female white-collar worker turned into a zombie and the driver died tragically. At this time, Chen Chu's cell phone rang. Subai's breathing suddenly became much heavier. Chen Chu woke up in a daze and looked for the phone. He lay on the bed and pressed the answer button. Hey, honey, what's wrong? In argument? With roommates? Okay, don't be angry. You and I will go back to sleep in the rental house outside the school. Well, wait for me. I'll get up soon. Chen Chu sat up from the bed and started to put on his socks, while Subai slowly tightened his grip on the dagger. After Chen Chu put on his socks and shoes, he opened the dormitory door and walked out with his mobile phone, wallet, and keys. It must have been his girlfriend who called him. She was going back to the school dormitory to copy her roommate's homework, but for some reason she had a conflict with her roommate. Now she didn't want to sleep in the dormitory at night, so she called her boyfriend in the middle of the night and asked him to accompany her. Go back to the rental house off campus and sleep. As soon as Chen Chu opened the door and left, Subai got off the bed. In fact, he had not taken off his clothes. After all, he was not ready to sleep. At this time, he was wearing a pair of light blue jeans and a black long-sleeved shirt. Wearing this on bed in the summer is also for convenience later. If something unexpected happens, sometimes clothes can resist some damage. Luhi was already asleep. Sudbai opened the dormitory door, maintained his own speed and rhythm, and followed Chen Chu downstairs. Chen Chu pushed open the door of the dormitory building and walked out. After a while, Sudbai quietly pushed the door open again, and he followed. As he walked, Sudbai was thinking about the whole thing. He had been taken to a scene in an unfinished building by a horror broadcast before, and then he returned to the side entrance of Ranking nightclub after the three ghosts turned into ashes. So, that means that I have now entered another scene? This scene might be completely fake, but Sudbai felt that there should be some truth and some lies. Now, it is obvious that Chen Chu is not dead yet, and it is not even possible for the murderer to imitate the voice of Chen Chu's girlfriend and call Chen Chu to trick him into coming out. In other words, the murderer who imitated the corpse dismemberment case decades ago has not yet committed a crime. Suddenly, Sudbai stopped in his tracks. Didn't come out to commit the crime. The time when the crime was committed. Is it this time? Sudbai took out his mobile phone and hid behind a tree on the path. His clothes covered him and he lit up the screen. When he saw the date, it was 3 days ago. Sudbai's breathing began to become faster, and he pursed his slightly dry lips. Because all the clues point in one direction. That is, tonight. It was the time when the corpse-dismembered murderer committed the crime, and it was almost about to begin. Should I continue walking forward and follow Chen Chu, or should I go back to the dormitory and lock the dormitory door to sleep? The former is undoubtedly very dangerous, because now the police don't know how the murderer committed the crime, and the many surveillance cameras in the school have not captured any clues. If he continues to follow Chen Chu, he will also be involved in that incident. In the midst of a murder that imitated the mutilation case, Sudbai's mind was not only filled with pieces of meat hidden in classrooms, flower gardens, toilets, etc., as well as the bird's nest on the tree. There are female heads in it, as well as the scene of Chen Chu being nailed to a chair, disemboweled and stuffed with water-filled condoms. It's very possible that he will become the third person to die. Sudbai thought of the hit-and-run driver again. He was obviously killed by the little girl, and he was tortured, but he ended up dead in a car accident. If I died in the story of this horrific broadcast, would there be a seamless explanation of my death in reality? Instinctively, Sudbai began to retreat. He was about to give up. This was a human instinct of fear of the unknown. However, at this moment, a cold light suddenly swept across Sudbai's sight. Sudbai turned around suddenly, but behind him, there were still quiet campus paths and dim street lights, with no one around. But Sudbai can be sure that just now, the reflection of a knife accidentally hit him. As a member of the murder club who has killed many people, Sudbai is very sensitive to this feeling. Have you been targeted? The murderer was hiding in a corner around him, holding the murder weapon in his hand, staring at him with a very obscure but cruel look, as if he was waiting for his prey, looking for the right opportunity. Take action. Pray, take action. Sudbai's teeth began to make a slight grinding sound. When he thought of the words prey and hunter, a hidden emotion in Sudbai's heart suddenly rose. It seems that he is also a hunter. And, most importantly, the other party actually chose to hide temporarily. What does this mean? If the female white-collar worker he met last time went on a rampage to kill him, then Sudbai really had no other choice. After all, the female white-collar worker was already a zombie. The other party, the murderer, is most likely a human. It's a person. Will be hidden. It means there are concerns. Okay, that's good. Sudbai slowly stepped back to the side, completely submerging his body into the woods behind the dormitory building. He held the dagger in front of him. They are all hunters. Then You can make gestures. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 12. Darkness brings fear to people, but it can also bring comfort to people, especially now, when Subai submerged into the forest, and when the darkness hit his body, Subai's breathing could not help but become slower. Some of the previous nervousness was calmed down. And at this moment, Chen Chu over there had turned the corner and walked far away. Under the streetlight, he could only vaguely see a vague figure. Subai slowly squatted down and hid his figure behind two trees. At the same time, he began to listen carefully to all the movements around him. Unless the murderer was a special forces soldier, otherwise, in this case, there would be no chance at all. It was impossible to approach him quietly. Woo 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 woo. Woo 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 woo. A small sound like a mosquito began to reach Subai's ears. Subai couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. Could it be? Own. Guessed wrong? The murderer is not human. But that kind of dirty stuff? Woo 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 woo. The sound seemed to be getting closer and closer, and beads of sweat slowly began to form on Subai's palm holding the dagger. The surrounding wind seemed to have stopped at this time, and the moon also entered the dark clouds. Even the street lights, which were originally dim and not very bright, began to flicker at this time. The whole atmosphere is suffocating. Subai's face was covered with cold sweat, but his eyes were still wide open. He raised his head slightly, holding the dagger in his right hand tightly against his chest. Finally, something cold was slowly placed on his shoulder. Like human hands. At the moment of contact, Subai let out a low shout, turned around, swung the dagger and stabbed directly. Ah! The sharp and harsh sound directly made Subai feel dizzy. His body staggered and fell to the ground. Subai covered his head with one hand and immediately looked forward. A white shadow passed right in front of his eyes. With a touch of panic and confusion, rushed directly into the back wall of the dormitory building, and then disappeared, as if he had gotten into it. Really, a ghost. Subai looked at his dagger and then looked ahead. At this time, the sound of footsteps was heard in the distance, the sound of boots stepping on fallen leaves. Subai immediately got up. Woof! A dog barked, and then, a little black dog rushed over. Subai subconsciously waved the dagger to stab, but the little black dog was very alert and responsive. He kicked off his front legs and moved his body directly towards, then he jumped over and avoided Subai's dagger. What are you doing? A sharp shout came, and a tall man wearing military camouflage came out, staring at Subai with a hint of anger. This is the man I saw at the barbecue stall outside the school before, but the man who was still wearing sunglasses at night is not here. The camouflage man looked at the knife in Subai's hand, then looked ahead, with a touch of contempt on his face. A wandering ghost in the dormitory actually scared you like this? Your dagger has killed several people. With resentment and hostility, these ghosts can't get close to you at all. The camouflage man looked around as he spoke. Where's that student? Where's the male student? Tell me which direction he went. Subai coughed, looked at the camouflage man, and said nothing. Mom, please tell me, do you know what it means to us if that thing succeeds in killing him and his girlfriend here? What does it mean? You. The camouflage man took a deep breath. Tell me your location. I don't have time to talk nonsense with you right now. The girls' dormitory is over there, separated by a basketball court. They should meet at the basketball court and then leave the school and go back to their rental house off campus. Subai asked again, isn't that ghost a murderer? Of course not. The camouflage man immediately turned around, led the dog in his hand and ran towards the basketball court. Subai hesitated for a moment, then ran after him. The camouflage man heard Subai following him and reminded him, follow me, it's best if you don't die. Subai didn't reply and just continued to follow. The basketball court has two exits, one facing the campus and the other facing the school gate. When Subai and the camouflage man came here, they happened to see two figures at the opposite door. The scene of the first crime should be in their rental house, Subai said. We must follow them now. If, according to you, they cannot be killed at this time according to the real situation, then, we even have to speed up and get to their rental house one step ahead of them. The murderer should be there ready to take action, and may even be hiding in their rental house at this time. The camouflage man's eyes narrowed slightly. How do you know? What if the murderer will attack on campus? The two people in front are still some distance away from the school gate. It seems that they are going to take the path behind the library. Very suitable to start with. Chen Chu's girlfriend was cooked and then quartered, or the body was quartered and then the meat was cooked again. In short, it is impossible for him to set up a big pot on campus and light a fire to cook the meat, and then contact Chen Chu to be discovered. He was nailed to death in the living room of his home, so the possibility that the murderer killed people in their rented house and cut them into pieces and cooked them is already very high. The camouflage man looked at Subai, then nodded. Is there another way? Climb over the wall and go out from the school gate on that side to the sunset red square outside the school. Then across the road is the community where their rental house is located. They have to go through the school gate. Even if they take the shortcut behind the library, they have to take a detour. If we make a big circle, we can make it in time. Okay, let's go. Subai took the camouflage man and ran towards the wall. The wall was not very high. Subai put his hands on the top, then found a foothold with his feet and went straight up. The camouflage man was more relaxed and just held the little black dog with one hand. Turned over. The two of them ran directly across Sunset Red Square to the opposite side of the road. In front of them was an old campus called Beijing Zinken, where Chen Chu and his girlfriend rented. According to the memory from the day, Subai found the building where Chen Chu lived, and the camouflage man walked behind Subai. The lights are on, the camouflage man said. Impossible, unless they are flying, they can't arrive earlier than us, and... Subai seemed to have discovered something. That's not a lamp, the light is dancing, it's a flashlight, and the person inside is holding a flashlight. Subai lowered his voice and said quickly. The camouflage man had a look of joy on his face, and then he took out a steel pipe from his waist and rushed directly into the dark corridor. Subai also followed him in. The lights in the corridor were broken. They were supposed to be voice-activated lights, but when they ran in, they didn't light up either. Everything around him was wrapped in darkness. After going upstairs, the camouflage man stood in front of the house without hesitation. After Subai followed, the camouflage man started kicking the door violently, and the sound of bang, 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 was heard endlessly. But even with such a violent impact, all the surrounding neighbors were silent, as if they had never heard it at all. Squeak. After a few moments, the door was knocked open by the camouflage man. The camouflage man rushed in, but there was no light at all inside. Subai's first reaction was that the prisoner had escaped. Take the window. Walking into the house, Subai subconsciously touched the light button at the door, but after pressing it, the light did not respond. Was it broken? Or maybe the switch in this home was turned off on purpose. At this moment, Subai suddenly felt a force coming from behind him. Subai turned sideways almost instinctively. Then, he felt a sharp pain on his shoulder, and his whole body was hit hard to the ground. Holding his shoulders, Subai lay on the ground. Snapped. The flashlight came on. The one holding the flashlight was actually the man in sunglasses, and the man with the steel pipe in his hand who had just attacked him was the man in camouflage. What do you mean, you are murderers? Subai asked. He, we are not that capable. The two of us are actually the same as you. However, Sometimes in order to complete the mission and survive, someone needs to sacrifice. Sorry, at first, we wanted to keep you alive and get more rewards, but now the situation has changed. Here, someone must die first to weaken the rhythm of that thing, and you are the most suitable. The man in sunglasses said as he motioned for the man in camouflage to take action. The camouflage man wanted to hit Subai on the head with a steel pipe, but Subai reacted too quickly and dodged the vital part. If you want to kill me, do you need to go to such trouble? Subai calmed down and touched his dagger. At the same time, he didn't understand that if the other party wanted to kill him, he could have had many opportunities before, and there was no need at all. It's a lot of trouble to trick yourself into coming here. There are some things that require us to go through a lot of trouble, the man in sunglasses explained. Now, it will be difficult for you to understand it quickly if I explain it to you, and there is no need to understand it. Stop whining, prepare condoms and knives, cripple him first and tie him up for later use. We are getting closer to the time we speculate that the crime will occur. The camouflage man urged and walked towards Subai. However, he soon froze because he saw a hint of panic in Subai's eyes. This was normal. When people face death and injury, they will definitely. He was frightened, but the key thing was that the frightened gaze did not fall on him, but behind him. Behind myself. Got something? What are you looking at, gila? The camouflage man's words turned into a gurgling sound halfway through his words. His tongue was actually spit out from his mouth, and when it fell to the ground, he made a bada crisp sound. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 13. Crack. The tongue fell to the ground. The camouflage man had no such defensiveness at all, and was completely stunned on the spot. The man in sunglasses shouted angrily, "Guo gang, back off." The camouflage man was like a wake-up call, and he rolled forward in embarrassment. The man with sunglasses had taken off his sunglasses at this time. His eyes were actually white, not as white as dead fish eyes, but with a faint light. At this moment, under his gaze, next, where Guo gang was standing before, a hand appeared. It was a very pale hand, and it seemed to be covered with frost. In his hand, a pair of scissors. Impossible, how could it appear here in advance? The man in sunglasses said to himself in confusion. At the same time, he took a deep look at Guo gang on the other side, turned around immediately, and ran out of the door without hesitation. When Guo gang saw his companion abandoning him and running away like this, he opened his mouth to curse, but because his tongue had been cut off, he couldn't speak at all. And, soon, Guo gang noticed a sudden stabbing pain in his waist. He lowered his head and was shocked to find that a dagger had been inserted into his waist. When Subai got up, he didn't care about that hand and the scissors in his hand. He came up to take revenge. No matter what powerful thing is in front of you, it can scare the previously arrogant man in sunglasses to the point where he abandons his companions and runs away. It doesn't matter whether he can escape safely by then. I'll stab you and get my revenge first. After the dagger penetrated, Subai wanted to stir it up. However, at this moment, he found that Guo gang's muscles were actually contracting to a degree that humans could not imagine. His dagger was completely stuck in it, and he couldn't help but feel it. Said it was stirred and couldn't even pull it out. You gurgling. Guo gang couldn't understand that the newcomer in front of him, when facing the unknown fear, his first thought was not to escape, but to come up and stab himself first. However, he didn't want to think about it, but he had planned to kill this newcomer before. Guo gang quickly stretched out his hand and strangled Subai's neck. He exerted force on his wrist, and Subai immediately felt a severe pain as if his neck was about to be broken. When the two people faced the existence that could scare the man in sunglasses into running away, they actually started fighting among themselves, killing each other in front of that terrifying existence. Guogang's strength is a bit inhuman. His muscles are as good as stones. These are not simple muscles, they are a bit like the legendary Iron Shirt. Subai grabbed Guogang's arm with both hands, then exerted force on his waist, lifted his legs off the ground, and directly clasped Guogang's neck with his scissor kicks. The two of them were entangled and fell to the ground. Guogang's tongue was cut off first, and then he was stabbed in the waist. He was able to exert 50% of his original strength, which is pretty good. Subai made them fall to the ground together in such a way. For a moment, there was nothing Subai could do about it. The two men were like roosters fighting anxiously, ignoring the chef's knife edge, which had already been stretched out. Buzz. The surrounding temperature dropped instantly, or it would be more appropriate to say that a feeling of coldness all over the body suddenly appeared. Immediately afterwards, he took a pair of scissors and appeared in front of Subai and Guogang, who were still entangled with each other. This seems to be the death sentence. The pale hands kept stroking the scissors, with a hint of hesitation and a touch of weirdness. Crack. The scissors fell, and a large piece of flesh was cut off from Subai's arm. Guogang had a look of extreme excitement on his face. That thing was ready to kill Subai first. As long as it killed Subai, according to the rhythm and pattern of the story, he would definitely be able to gain something from the death of a participant. A certain amount of time to breathe. Subai almost fainted from the pain, because his neck was now being pinched by Guogang, and he couldn't breathe at all. Even when he watched a large piece of flesh on his arm being cut so neatly by scissors, when she cut it off, she couldn't even cry out in pain, so she could only stare at the scene with blood-red eyes. This is a great torture, a terrible torture. Guogang was laughing, even though his tongue was cut off and his mouth kept bleeding when he laughed, he was still laughing. However, soon, his smile froze. A firefly flew in, and then landed on Guogang's arm, which was the arm that was currently squeezing Subai's neck. Guogang's eyes immediately widened. He knew the origin of this firefly and also knew who could release this firefly. Snapped. The fireflies exploded, no harm, just a small ball of fireworks the size of a fingernail, a moment of youthfulness. However, that hand seemed to have been stimulated by something. The movement of the second scissors, which was originally aimed at Subai, changed instantly and directly pierced Guogang's arm. Click. Crisp. Cold. Without any hindrance. Subai unexpectedly pierced Guogang's waist with a dagger. Guogang was able to carry it down after reacting. But facing the scissors, he couldn't bear it or hold on. Half of the arm fell together with the scissors. Subai felt as if he had received an amnesty, and he knelt on the ground, stroking his neck with both hands and breathing in the air greedily. Guogang was angry and panicked and wanted to get up and run away. However, when he stood up and was about to run towards the door, one of his legs separated from his body and he fell to the ground. Blood flowed out and soaked the entire tile floor. Immediately afterwards, the scissors seemed to have completely focused on Guogang. With each scissor, the skin and flesh on Guogang's body were separated bit by bit like a ramen master slicing noodles, and even the meat slices were still, swirling in mid-air, creating a strange beauty and harmony. Guogang was struggling desperately. He wanted to leave here, but when his hand was about to touch the threshold, the only remaining hand was separated immediately. Gilug, Gilug. Guogang let out an angry roar unwillingly, and then the life in his eyes began to disappear. Finally, he lay sluggishly and feebly on the ground, motionless, obviously he could no longer die. The originally pale hand was obviously stained with too much blood when he killed Guogang. It seemed that Guogang's blood also had its own special features. The hand could not get rid of it and became a little soft, and the scissors also became soft. It's a little twisted, as if it's been blunted, but it doesn't seem like that. Subai looked at the hand that had just killed someone, motionless, because he knew that if the other person wanted to kill him, he would not be able to escape. When that hand and the scissors wanted to cut you, you would not be able to escape. When he had the opportunity to dodge, Guogang's burst of power while running just now was already very fast, but he was cut into pieces in an instant. However, that hand just held the scissors and slowly backed away, and finally disappeared into the darkness. Gone. Subai stood up with difficulty in disbelief. A large piece of flesh had been cut off from his left arm. It was really painful, but at this time he could only grit his teeth and hold on. Tentatively walking out of the door, Subai walked very slowly and carefully. When he passed Guogang's body, Subai took a special look at the other person's body. Until now, Subai has not been able to understand why the camouflage man and the man in sunglasses deliberately deceived him to come here to kill him. They seem to be the same type of people as him, but they seem to be different people. The reason for the difference was that they knew something that he didn't know. Finally, when he walked out of the house, Subai's whole back was wet with cold sweat. This was really a line between life and death. And, yes, it's a bit inexplicable. After walking down the stairs, Subai's face began to look paler due to excessive blood loss in his arm, but fortunately, he was not in danger of life, which was considered a blessing in misfortune. There was a person standing at the entrance of the unit building. Subai subconsciously looked for his dagger, but couldn't find it. It was obviously left in that room. The man was chewing gum, with one foot on the wall, holding a coin in his hand and fiddling with it casually. However, what caught Subai's attention more was the sparkling light between the man's cuffs. Those are fireflies, a swarm of fireflies. Before, if the firefly hadn't suddenly appeared, then it would have been him who died, not Guogang. Why don't you kneel down and kowtow to express gratitude when you see your savior? The other party acted very frivolously. Under the moonlight, his figure looked very slender, and his whole person also had a bohemian temperament. His hair, still very long. According to Subai's understanding, this kind of person is actually more suitable to sing songs under the overpass with a broken acoustic guitar and a bowl in front of him. Thanks. It is impossible to kowtow, but a thank you is well deserved. It seemed that the other party was just joking before and didn't take it seriously. He just casually took out a handkerchief from his pocket, spit the chewing gum on it, and finally looked at Subai. Those two self-righteous fools wanted to be stuck at the time and place of the incident, rely on the most primitive rules, and kill an audience member to reduce danger and avoid disaster, so as to complete their mission. It's just that they are a little stupid and naive, and they don't care what kind of day it is. The man shook his head and turned to leave. As he walked, he extended a hand and waved. I'm not trying to save you, it's just the method they wanted to use before. If it comes to a last resort, I will use it too. Subai didn't know what the guy was talking about, nor did he know what the man in sunglasses and the man in camouflage were doing before, but based on his previous experience, it seemed that if one of the listeners died, the ongoing danger would be interrupted. It was probably the man with glasses and the man with sunglasses who tricked me into trying to kill him. After taking off his clothes and bandaging his arm, Subai left the community, planning to go back to school first and get some medicine from the infirmary. As he was crossing the road, he happened to see a familiar figure. It was Chen Chu. At this time, Chen Chu was carrying a barbecue takeout and walked into a fun-themed couple hotel opposite the school. Subai suddenly understood what the long-haired man meant. Tonight, Chen Chu and his girlfriend did not go back to the rental house, but went to a couple's hotel. This also meant that, the time of the crime was not tonight. He, the man in sunglasses and the man in camouflage. All wrong. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 14. Date, time, Crime point. Sudbai covered his forehead with one hand. He felt that his head hurt a little. However, there was not much pressure on his mind. It was just that he really didn't like this kind of foggy feeling, especially when he was in the clouds. He is obviously a participant in the game, even risking his life to participate in the game, but he still doesn't know the rules of the game. Back at school, there are very few people in the school now. Even the guard room at the gate has no guard. Sudbai came to the door of the infirmary in the living area. Originally, there were several snack bars nearby that were open at night, but they were all closed tonight. Perhaps, some unimportant people will not appear here. This was Sudbai's own guess. Of course, he knew that he now needed some basic medicine to treat the wound. He kicked open the door of the infirmary, which was not very secure, with his foot. After walking in, Sudbai took some medicine, briefly disinfected the wound, and wrapped his arm with a bandage. Although it was not very beautiful, it wasn't very rigorous, but Sudbai didn't care so much anymore. Sitting on the wooden floor in the infirmary, Sudbai leaned his head behind the table. A feeling of exhaustion came over him, and he fell into a deep sleep. This time, Sudbai had no dreams and slept very soundly. When he woke up, he felt a cramp in his stomach. Rubbing his eyes, Sudbai looked outside the door. The sun was already shining brightly, but the sunshine that could have brought warmth to people now revealed a faint chilling atmosphere. Because, outside, no students are walking around. Sudbai pursed his lips. He knew that this was a besieged city, a special area, or a strange stage. Here, when needed, supporting characters will appear, such as Luhi in the dormitory. However, most of the rest of the time, there are no characters outside of the story, and there is even no superficial effort. After walking out of the infirmary, blocking the sun with his hands, Sudbai went to a canteen next door. There was no one inside, so Sudbai took some bread and ate it with mineral water. After eating, Sudbai didn't even know where to go. A feeling of being isolated from the whole world came over him. After all, human beings are social animals. If he was suddenly thrown into an uninhabited environment, who would let him go? It's all a bit unbearable. Walking back to the dormitory, Sudbai finally saw someone. The dormitory aunt was sitting at the door listening to music, with a cup of chrysanthemum tea beside her. Seeing Sudbai come back, the dormitory aunt just opened her eyes slightly and took a look, then closed her eyes and continued to take a nap. She didn't seem to know that there were too many people missing from the school, and it was even more deserted than usual. After walking into the dormitory, Sudbai came to the door of his dormitory and took the key to open the door. There was no one in the dormitory now, not even Luhi. Chen Chu's bed quilt was huddled casually in the corner. Sudbai had tried before, calling other people's mobile phones by himself, but it was completely empty. QQ, WeChat, and other software, even after logging in, he could not send messages to his friends. It was like there was an invisible network around him, which had tied him up. Inside, cutting off all contact with the outside world. It's not that he never thought about leaving school, or even leaving the city, but every time he thought of this thought, Sudbai suddenly felt like he was being swept by a pair of eyes, as if he did this, his fate would be absolutely terrible. It would be very tragic. For a horror story, characters who drop out midway are usually given an ending, an early end, which is death. Now, I am in the horror story told by the horror broadcast. If you leave the specified story area without authorization, or attempt to do something beyond the limits of the story, you will be punished in advance, or even killed in advance. No one told Sudbai about this rule, but the clear feeling of crisis was so real that no one could help but believe it. It means, unless the story is finished, I have to stay in the story. Sudbai stood by the windowsill of the dormitory, holding his fingers on the window, his knuckles turning white. At this time, Sudbai's cell phone vibrated, which was a bit surprising, but Subai immediately answered the call. Hello. Hey, Subai, for today's test, the teacher asked us to call the students who skipped class to come over quickly, otherwise there will be no credits for this class. Come over quickly, we are in classroom AJ102. This is the call Luhi made to Subai. Okay, I'll come right away. Subai hung up the phone, thought for a while, found a coat and put it on his body to cover the wound on his arm. Then he left the dormitory without taking a book or a pen. When Subai walked out of the dormitory, he suddenly saw some students, both men and women, sparsely appearing in the area outside the dormitory. When Subai walked towards the teaching area, the people here became even denser. In particular, the large lecture hall AJ102 was almost full. Subai entered through the back door, found Luhi, and sat down next to Luhi. The teacher in front looked on with cold eyes, watching the students who had skipped class enter the classroom one by one, like a judge of hell, with a faint sarcastic smile on the corner of his mouth. I can't get through Chen Chu's phone. It keeps prompting me to turn off my phone. What should I do? Luhi said to Subai. Hearing Luhi's words, Subai frowned immediately. Yes, Chen Chu. Although there were many things about the behavior of the man in sunglasses and the man in camouflage last night that made Subai a little confused, one thing was very clear. Their goal and purpose was the incident between Chen Chu and his girlfriend. The way the story ends is even the key to the survival of myself and others. It is Chen Chu and his girlfriend. Last night, Subai remembered seeing Chen Chu carrying a barbecue into a love hotel. The previous speculation on the date of death was obviously wrong. The murder did not happen last night, but most likely, tonight. Based on my own experience before entering this ghost story, I can infer that it should really be the same, because if it were delayed any longer, it would conflict with the time when the corpse was discovered before. My phone is low on battery. Give me your phone. I know where Chen Chu is. I'll go find him. Subai didn't wait for Luhi's reaction, grabbed Luhi's cell phone, and walked out of the classroom. Although his physical condition is not very good now, Subai still walks very fast, and sweat breaks out from time to time on his face. In fact, his body has been well exercised before, but these 2 days have been too hard, not to mention carrying a injured. After walking out of the school gate, there was not a single car on the road outside. Subai tried to use Luhi's mobile phone to continue calling Chen Chu, but Chen Chu's phone was still turned off. Subai went to the hotel. As soon as he entered the hotel, the popularity seemed to suddenly appear again. The front desk of the hotel and the guests sitting on the sofa in the hotel lobby all appeared. Before, no one was seen outside the hotel, like it just appeared out of thin air. Moreover, what surprised Subai the most was that sitting on a sofa was the young man who had saved him last night. The man was leaning on the sofa with a glass of mineral water in front of him, his legs crossed and his eyes half closed. Subai walked towards him, and the man raised his hand slightly. Why, I'm not interested in newcomers, and I don't like the reward of protecting newcomers' survival. Subai didn't know what to say, but at this time, it seemed that there was no need to say anything more. At this moment, the hotel elevator door opened, and a man and a woman walked out of it. Chen Chu held his girlfriend's hand and walked out. Chen Chu! Subai shouted. Subai, why are you here? Chen Chu looked a little surprised. Is something wrong? I forgot to charge my phone last night and turned it off. Chen Chu's girlfriend showed a shy look. The young man was slightly surprised to see that Subai actually knew Chen Chu. He tapped his fingers lightly on the coffee table, then stood up and walked behind Subai. Do you know the target person? Target person? Although Subai didn't know what the target person meant, he could guess that he should be referring to Chen Chu and Chen Chu's girlfriend. Apparently, as if he saw that he knew Chen Chu and the others, this man put away his previous indifferent attitude towards him. Yes, I know you. That's good, think of a way to let them follow the previous trajectory, not to go back to school, but to their rental house. The plot of the story must not deviate from the general direction. You know them, and you will not be subject to rules. Punishment. Subai, why are you here? Chen Chu walked over and asked again. It's my birthday today, and I want to treat you to dinner at noon, Subai said immediately. Is this so urgent? Why hasn't Nana has to go back and hand in her thesis homework? She has her first class in the afternoon. It's okay. I can say hello to the leaders of her hospital. Your girlfriend will not fail this semester, Subai said naturally. Oh. Chen Chu glanced at his girlfriend. He knew Subai's family background, so he didn't think Subai was bragging. Moreover, the other party's willingness to invite him to the birthday party was also a sign of respect for him. The respect even made him feel flattered. Okay, happy birthday to you. Where will the party be held? Chen Chu asked. Is it okay to just stay in your rental house? I have reserved a team of hotel chefs who will come over soon. It's just me, you, Nana and Lu He. You know, I don't have many friends in school. And someone who can talk, so the birthday party can be held at your home. Okay, then you're going to my house now, right? Chen Chu held his girlfriend's hand and walked in front, while Subai followed behind. The three of them walked out of the hotel together. Soon, the young man caught up with him and said in Subai's ear. Do you know that you pushed them into the fire pit on purpose? They are already dead, but I want to live, Subai replied. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 15. Although this is fake, it's not much different from the real thing. They will still experience the painful feeling of being tortured and killed again, and you are the promoter and the executioner. The man opened his mouth. He was very close to Subai. However, I suddenly like your appearance. Although you are a newcomer who has not yet joined the mainstream, your mentality is much better than others, and you are not sloppy in doing things. Haha, not bad. Originally, the man's breath hit Subai's ears when he spoke, which made Subai very disgusted. However, the man actually stuck out his tongue and licked Subai's earlobe after he finished speaking. Subai's body was shocked, and he immediately stretched out his hand, but was directly grabbed by the opponent. The opponent seemed to have a very weak and slender body, a bit similar to the Korean version of the long-legged Appa, but the strength of his hand was very terrifying. Subai only felt that his hands seemed to be stuck tightly in a pair of vice, unable to move at all. Don't attack me, otherwise, your end will be ugly. It's your honor that I have feelings for you. You said it yourself, you want to live, don't you? The man released his hand and saw that Subai had no intention of doing anything again. He smiled, shrugged, and continued, my name is Mai Mei, and my surname is Hai. You can call me young Master Hai. As long as you are obedient, I can let you. If you survive this story, it will even help you continue to survive in the next story. Subai stretched out his hand, wiped his ears, looked at Gongzi Hai, and said. Your parents really had the foresight to give you a good name. It's okay. The more you behave like this, the more I like it. In my eyes, Little Pepper is always more interesting than Little Sweetheart. Okay, no more nonsense, follow me. This time, we can't let them go to the rental house first. There is that the guy's remains are here. Gongzi Hai chased after him directly. His walking posture was very strange. Subai had not noticed it before. Now walking behind him, he felt that his feet were slightly lame when he walked, but it was not very obvious. Story. Plot. Subai only had a partial understanding of these things. The man in sunglasses and the man in camouflage made a failed attempt for himself last night, and now, it seems that Gongzi Hai is planning to try again. Chen Chu and his girlfriend walked in front, Subai walked behind them, and Gongzihai followed a little further away. In fact, this hotel was very close to Chen Chu's rental house. However, when the four of them were halfway there, it was a clear sky and day, but suddenly dark clouds rolled in, and it started to rain when it was said to rain. Chen Chu hugged his girlfriend and started running. Subai also ran behind, while Gongzihai rushed over in advance and got in front of everyone. Chen Chu looked at Gongzihai with some surprise, and turned his head to look at Subai behind him, showing a confused look. It means asking if that is your friend. Yes, my friend flew from Beijing specially to celebrate my birthday with me, Subai replied. Chen Chu stopped asking and everyone speeded up together. It got dark very quickly, and it was actually in the morning, but the dark clouds pressed hard, creating a feeling that it was already dark. When Chen Chu and his girlfriend came to the entrance of the unit building downstairs, Subai saw a few fireflies flying there. Look, fireflies. Maybe it's getting dark, and the fireflies thought it was night. Chen Chu made a joke to his girlfriend, and then the two of them walked in together. Subai, who was standing behind, watched a firefly fly to Chen Chu and his girlfriend. Subai paused for a moment, wondering if he should continue walking in. He raised his head and looked at the rental house kitchen above. Gongzihai was holding a toothpick he didn't know where he got in his mouth, and said to Subai nodded. Subai then walked into the stairs. The door still looked like it had been knocked open. Standing outside the door, you could see the blood inside and Guo Gang's broken body. However, Chen Chu and his girlfriend seemed to be completely unaware and just walked in. Chen Chu's girlfriend, when he went to get a drink, Chen Chu invited Subai to come in and sit down with him. The two of them could not see the blood and corpses on the ground at all, as if they had entered their rental house and their love nest as usual. By the way, Subai, where is your friend? Chen Chu asked. Gongzihai stood behind Chen Chu and made a shh gesture to Subai. Then he walked up to Subai, patted Subai on the shoulder, and motioned for Subai to go out with him first. My friend should be contacting the chef. He specially arranged it for me. Originally, I didn't even plan to celebrate my birthday. I went down to look for him first to see if anyone over there has arrived. Well, okay, then the two of us will wait at home for dinner. Didn't you also provide the venue? This is a big help to me, Subai said with a smile, and then walked out with Gongzihai. The two of them went downstairs directly, walked out of the unit building, and stood on the side of the flower garden. What should I do next? Subai asked. Lang Shabai, you don't even know the task. You are just a newcomer experiencing life. However, you are lucky and you can complete the task together. Some rewards will be distributed according to your participation. Will they die immediately? Subai asked. Gongzihai raised his head and pointed at the sky. Isn't it too wasteful to not die in this scene? A drop of rain fell on Gongzihai's eyebrows. Gongzihai's whole person immediately changed his temperament. The previous laziness completely disappeared and he became very cautious. It coming. What about last night? Last night it was just that those two idiots miscalculated the time and came a day early. However, their calculation was indeed good. I want to see how scary that thing is first. If it is not very strong, I will do it main mission 1, if it's too tricky, do main mission 2. Main mission 1 and main mission 2? What are they? Gongzihai looked at Subai. I know you have a lot of doubts in your mind right now, but can you talk to a curious baby? Gongzihai's words were suddenly interrupted. Then, he stepped back, and a piece of grass was cut away where he originally stood. This time, the background is a bit big. I can actually find the onlookers. Back off, back off. Gongzihai began to retreat quickly, and Subai naturally followed suit. However, the other party seemed to have no interest in catching up. After a short demonstration, there was no movement. Gongzihai took out a handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his hands, and shook his head, This thing is very fierce then. Gong Zihai looked at Subai again. My dear, if necessary, I have to sacrifice you. Subai looked at Gong Zihai and said nothing. Above, at the kitchen window, a faint light of blood suddenly appeared. Yes, bloody light. Main mission 1 is to destroy that thing, and main mission 2 is to find out the origin of that thing. The reward of main mission 1 is definitely much richer than main mission 2, but that thing is a bit difficult for me to deal with now, so I still choose the main mission. Let's go to mission 2. Come on, come up with me, now. Snapped. Subai suddenly slapped his neck, and then took his hand back. In the palm of his hand, there was a firefly that had been slapped to death. What are you doing? Gong Zihai pretended to be confused and said, if I control you, it will actually be more conducive to your survival. Subai shook his head and began to retreat. Gong Zihai narrowed his eyes, do you think you can escape from my grasp? Subai pointed to the kitchen window above, he has started killing people. Are you going up or coming to catch me? Gong Zihai took a deep breath. Did you know that if we hadn't gone up and seen its true identity when it killed the young couple, the story would have continued and it would have chosen one of us listeners to continue. Kill until we find its identity. If we still fail to find it, then all of our listeners who came in this time will die. Then why don't you go? Who will it kill next time? You and I should have the same chance. You are very good. Gong Zihai turned around, but at this moment, his body began to burn, and then turned into a group of fireflies. Subai was stunned for a moment, and then his neck was strangled. At the same time, one of the other party's hands directly put a firefly into his mouth. Gong Zihai actually appeared behind Subai using a blind method. You are too young to fight with me. Come on, go upstairs. After Subai was forced to swallow the fireflies, his whole body was no longer under his control, and he began to walk towards the stairs actively. Gong Zihai followed Subai. Obviously, the ferocity of this thing was beyond the limit. Gong Zihai's original expectation was that he had said last night that the methods used by Guo Gang and the man in sunglasses were too unfashionable, but today, he had to use such unfashionable methods. When a listener dies, the level of danger around him will instantly diminish. This is a theorem. Entering the house again, Subai saw that Chen Chu had been nailed to a chair and disemboweled. There was a condom box on the ground, and his stomach was stuffed full of things. In the kitchen, a figure was moving, and at the same time, there was a smell of meat. This is cooking a corpse. However, at this time, Subai's body continued to move forward uncontrollably, and Mr. Hai walked closely behind Subai. Finally, I walked into the kitchen. Pieces of minced meat were neatly arranged on the floor and walls of the kitchen, and a large pot was cooking in the pot. Immediately afterwards, the figure turned around, holding a pair of scissors in the figure's hand. Mr. Hai stretched his head out from behind Subai and took a look, but he was immediately shocked. This. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 16. In front of Subai and Gong Zihai, the body was being cooked. He's actually not alone. But a paper man. A paper man as tall as a man. The paper figurine is an image wearing a servant's hat on his head, with thick blush on his face and pink eyes. He is about 1.6 meters tall. He holds a pair of scissors in one hand and chopsticks in the other hand. Fiddled with the corpse pieces in the pot. As if he noticed the person coming, the paper man's head turned slightly and tilted downward slightly, looking at Subai and Gong Zihai with a half smile. Paper figurines are not unfamiliar to most Chinese people. Even though more traditional funerals are being curtailed, it has not been many years ago. Most people have seen the scene of paper figurines being burned at funerals in rural areas. Even now, most of the rural areas in China still maintain such a custom. Paper figurines were made, mostly in the form of boys, girls, maids, and servants. They were burned in the upper world, which meant that they were burned to their deceased relatives, so that these paper figurines could serve their relatives in the underground. Such a kind of grief. Therefore, paper figures have a very taboo image. Most people will feel uncomfortable if they see a paper figure lying on the roadside while walking on the road. At this time, this paper man was cooking the corpse. He is the murderer? Subai screamed in his heart, but soon he realized that no, this paper man was not the murderer. From Gong Zihai's narrative, the condition for completing mission 2 is to find the murderer. So, now if the paper man is murderer, the mission should be completed. Now, it doesn't look like the mission has been accomplished. Gong Zihai gritted his teeth and said, "It's really unlucky." Then, the next moment, the paper man held scissors and rushed over in a very strange posture. He still had a smile on his face, but he looked extremely sinister, especially since there was still a piece of minced meat on the scissors in his hand. Gong Zihai grabbed Subai's shoulder with one hand and took out a string of small Buddhist beads with the other hand. Subai had seen this kind of beads before. When he traveled to Tibet, he saw some women holding these beads in their hands and chanting sutras. The prayer beads were thrown out and collided with the paper man. At this time, the beads seemed to contain a power that could ward off evil spirits, and they directly flattened the paper man. Originally, the paper man had a three-dimensional effect and was represented by paper, built with bamboo strips or thin wooden strips as supports. The Buddhist beads went away and came back again, and fell into the hands of Mr. Hai again. Mr. Hai also had a smile on his face, but Subai, who was being used as a human shield while standing in front of Mr. Hai, cursed in his heart, because he saw it most vividly, being beaten into a piece of paper. The paper man did not change his momentum and continued to rush towards here. Even the hand and the scissors in it were flattened. They were all paper, all paper, all paper. Subai finally understood why the hand he saw last night was so white, and why he couldn't shake it off after being stained with blood, because that hand was made of a piece of paper. Was it because we didn't have enough time last night, or because the paper man wasn't completely finished yet, so there was only one hand? The scissors stabbed directly. The speed, the momentum, and the sharpness that Subai witnessed last night were no less powerful than a bullet, and even far exceeded the power of a bullet. Gong Zihai immediately let out a low roar and pushed Subai forward. Subai could not control his body at all now. After Gong Zihai pushed him, he even had to take the initiative to move forward, which was equivalent to rushing forward by himself. Go and get knifed, go and die. At this time, Subai didn't have much hatred in his heart, because there was no time to have such emotions. When death came, his mind was completely blank. When I killed people before, did the people I killed also have the same situation in their minds? This was the last thought that came to Subai's mind. Click. Subai felt a sharp pain on his face, but he also felt lucky that the paper man's scissors happened to pass right through his face, piercing his cheek directly. Cut off half of the flesh of Subai's face, but, after all, it was not a fatal injury, nor was it directly stabbed between the eyebrows or other parts. The body of the paper man was not that sharp. When it hit Subai, he just felt a strong impact. Subai was knocked away, hit the wall, and fell down. Below, there were the pieces of Guo Gang's body and Chen Chu's fresh blood. Subai's whole body immediately became extremely embarrassed. Gong Zihai originally wanted Subai to be the scapegoat. As long as the paper man kills Subai, after an audience member dies, the storyline will be relaxed and the danger will be reduced. This is a routine and a way to participate in the mission. Audiences with higher frequency understand and apply the rules, however. Subai. Not dead. So. This means that the danger is not over. The paper man did not change direction to kill Subai, who was knocked away by him and had his face shaved off. Instead, he continued to move forward, approaching Gong Zihe. There were beads of sweat on Gong Zihai's face, but he did not run away like Guo Gang and leave his back to the paper man. Instead, he held a string of Buddhist beads in his hand, pulled them out into a semicircle, and covered them with the paper man's scissors. However, at the next moment, something happened that almost collapsed Gong Zihe. The moment the scissors touched the beads fell apart, the thread burst, the beads flew around, and it was completely chaotic for a while. However, most of the momentum of the scissors should have been offset. After piercing Gong Zihai's chest, it only entered a little bit and failed to penetrate completely. Gong Zihe quickly clamped the paper man's flat scissors with both hands. At the same time, a swastika mark appeared between his eyebrows. His aura suddenly increased, and he stopped the paper man's scissors abruptly. At this moment, Subai suddenly felt that his body was under his control again. It should be that Gong Zihai had no time to distract himself to control himself. Subai immediately stood up. Gong Zihai looked at Subai from the corner of his eye. He watched Subai stand up. He was very nervous now, yes, he was very nervous. He clearly remembered what Subai was doing when he appeared last night. When that hand appeared in a terrifying posture, Subai actually chose a dagger to stab into Guo Gang's body, choosing direct revenge. If he does it to himself now, then, himself. Gong Zihe wanted to shout something, and even planned to fly out his fireflies, but he couldn't do it now. The power on the pair of scissors was getting stronger and stronger, and it was getting deeper and deeper into his flesh and blood. He couldn't hold it anymore. This thing was more powerful than he thought. Moreover, he is not an ordinary murderer exaggerated in the story, but a supernatural being in reality, another improvement in the story. This means that this paper man really exists in reality, and in the story, it becomes even more terrifying. It was completely different from what I had faced in the story scenes I had experienced before. Subai's eyes were always staring at the paper man's hand. Yesterday, he had seen the paper man's hand. After its hand was stained red by Guo Gang's blood yesterday, he tried to shake it off, but because it's made of paper, so it can't be thrown away. Today, that hand is still white. What does this mean? The paper man's hand has been replaced. Why change hands? Why? Just to look good? No, it's impossible, there's a reason, there's a reason. Subai suddenly raised his head and shouted to Gong Zihai, "Damn bitch, hold on a little longer." As soon as he finished speaking, Subai rushed to the kitchen pot. It was a soup pot with a large pot of meat slices cooking in it. Subai directly picked up the pot and poured all the soup on the paper figure. However, water cannot wet the paper man's body at all. Gong Zihai's face began to look paler and paler. Not afraid of water? No, no, it must be afraid of things related to water. Subai immediately looked around. He suddenly found that the boiled corpses were very clean, the blood stains on them were rarely very good, and they were basically in the boiling process. Removed. Why do paper figures need to be superfluous? Why did it boil the body and then cut it into pieces? Subai previously thought that the murderer was afraid that traces of his crime would be left in the body, so he cooked the body. However, if the murderer was a paper man, or the tool used to commit the crime was a paper man, there would be no need to do this. So much. It does this because it's afraid of blood. Subai rushed directly to Chen Chu's body and took out the condom inside. The condom was filled with water, but on the surface, it was soaked in layers of Chen Chu's blood and was very thick. Snapped. Snapped. The condom stained with extremely rich blood hit the paper man's scissors. The scissors began to twist and soften as the blood soaked them again and again. Gong Zihai's pressure was greatly reduced immediately, and his momentum immediately increased, and he even planned to start a counterattack. Snapped. After Subai threw the last condom in his hand, the paper man's scissors broke under the twist of Gong Zihai's hands. The paper figure quickly turned towards the door, intending to escape. Gong Zihai knelt on the ground. The injury on his chest was very serious, but he got up immediately and shouted to Subai. "Chase, chase, follow it and find the real murderer." Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 17. If the identity of the murderer cannot be found this time, then I don't know when it will be next time. Moreover, this time it is actually because the paper man or the murderer behind the scenes is still acting according to the predetermined trajectory and development. It follows a known plot, so for Subai and Gong Zihai, there are still traces to follow. At least they know when and where this paper man will appear. But what about next time? Who will the paper man target next time? Where will it hide and suddenly appear to give you a fatal blow? No one knows this, and no one can guess it. Even if there are blood bags at the ready, it will probably be impossible to prevent it. Moreover, Gong Zihai himself was injured. Except for Gong Zihai, who was able to hold a stalemate with the paper man, the man in sunglasses was frightened away and Guo Gang was directly tortured to death. Subai himself was not able to deal with this kind of situation. Level attack, so this time is really the last chance. If you can't follow the paper man back to find the real murderer this time, then things will be completely out of control. This is also the reason why Subai did not directly take revenge on Gong Zihai when he was fighting against the paper man, because he wanted to live and killed Gong Zihai. He could not handle the paper man and the mastermind behind it by himself. The paper man must have been soaked in blood and felt like he was severely injured. The speed was not very fast, so when Subai chased after him, the paper man did not fly far. In fact, when it was flying now, it still seemed it was very reluctant, and it didn't fly very high, so it couldn't look like a paper kite. That's it. Subai covered his cheek with one hand, but he still couldn't stop the blood from flowing out. There was nothing he could do because Subai didn't have time to treat the wound now, and he almost had it on his right cheek. The entire piece of flesh was cut off directly, but the injury was very serious. The only good thing was that it was not fatal for the time being, and he did not lose his ability to move because of it, but the whole person now looked extremely terrifying. After Subai chased him for a long distance, Gong Zihai stumbled and fell down the stairs. He climbed to the entrance of the corridor and simply gave up the intention of continuing to chase. He sat down directly against the wall of the corridor and muttered. "Damn it, if this newcomer really catches me, he will get most of the rewards for this mission. It's really a bargain for him." Gong Zihai knew that although he was a little unwilling now, he could only hope that Subai could follow the paper man to find the murderer behind the scenes and help everyone complete the main mission together. Otherwise, wait until the paper man recovers, or ask him to make a new one. Then let's all wait together to be killed one after another. This paper man exists in reality. This case was originally a supernatural incident. After being incorporated into the story by Terror Broadcast, it became more powerful and terrifying. Otherwise, if it were in the real world, Gong Zihai would be confident that he could suppress the paper man or even tear it into pieces, but here, he couldn't. Here, what shocked Subai was that the paper man actually floated all the way into the school gate. The murderer is indeed someone from the school. Subai didn't find this surprising at all. The deceased were 2 students, and Chen Chu's girlfriend was specially dumped on campus. So the possibility of the murderer being someone from the school is very high. If it was someone outside the school, in fact, there is no need to be so serious about people. Who on earth is it? School worker? Teacher? Or maybe a student? Fortunately, the omission of the story plot did help Subai a lot at this time. When he chased the paper man from the community to the school gate, he didn't meet anyone. There was not a car on the road, and there was no one at the school gate. There were no security guards in the security room, and no students or people were seen on campus. Otherwise, if there were pedestrians or students around or security guards in the security room at this time, it would be impossible for Subai to continue chasing the paper man in the school with his blood-covered image. However, think about it from another angle. If in a story, several characters finally found a glimmer of hope after going through a lot of hard work, dying or being injured, but at this time they were suddenly intercepted by a group of passers-by or security guards. That glimmer of light was snuffed out in this way, which really made the audience vomit blood. Maybe the horror broadcast is also for the continuity of the story, so it is a convenience here and does not completely follow the realistic style. The paper man seemed to have chosen to enter the woods deliberately to get rid of Subai, but Subai was also a student of this school after all, and because of the establishment of the killing club, even Subai was not as good as those professional killers who actually took on the assassination mission. But it can be regarded as developing the habit of observing the surrounding environment carefully. Subai was very familiar with this forest, so it would be difficult for the paper man to get rid of him here. The paper man kept running around in the forest, his body flickering and disappearing, but Subai observed calmly every time. It was still difficult for the paper man to continuously break away from Subai's perspective and achieve the goal of getting rid of it completely. Just as Subai was getting closer and closer to the paper man's body actually began to shed its skin. Yes, it shed its skin. The paper men shed their skin, and two identical paper men appeared. This was a very strange phenomenon, and it also dazzled Subai. For a moment, the three paper figures flew in three different directions in the forest. Subai had no idea which one to follow, and if he hadn't made a plan early, after the paper man completely flies away, it will be too late. Damn it! Subai gritted his teeth. He was not willing to choose one of the three bets now, but time was running out. It seemed impossible not to make a bet or take a gamble. But if the bet failed, the result would be really unimaginable. However, at this moment, a ray of light came from the walkway outside the forest. This light was very familiar to Subai. The light shone on the three paper figures in turn, and finally, the paper figure in the middle also responded with a faint light. Is that one? That's right. Subai no longer hesitated and chased after the reflective paper man. On the walkway beside the forest, a man took off his sunglasses and rubbed his eyes. There was blood dripping from his eye sockets. Obviously, it was a burden for him to see through the other party's appearance from such a long distance. For Subai, the chase is still going on. A paper man and a man seem to be engaged in a fierce battle of endurance, with both sides trying their best. However, the paper man's condition seemed to be worse, because Subai saw that its flying height was getting lower and lower, and in the end, it could only fly with its body dragging on the ground, unable to lift it up at all. It's dying. It must hurry back to its master. And where it's going? That's where the murderer is. Finally, the paper man couldn't hold on any longer and flew out of the forest, seemingly no longer intending to linger. However, then, something unexpected happened to Subai. The paper man actually flew through the forest and flew directly to the dormitory building. Subai chased him all the way until the end. He actually arrived at the door of the dormitory building where he lived. Murderer! Have you actually been living in the same dormitory building with yourself? What a joke! Subai suddenly felt a very ridiculous feeling in his heart, but he still chased after him because he saw the paper man entering with his own eyes and he would not be dazzled. Entering the dormitory building, I followed the paper man above that was almost unable to fly. The paper man really couldn't fly anymore. It was almost lying on the ground and began to glide, and its speed began to become slower and slower. In fact, now Subai gritted his teeth. He could still go up and grab it, but Subai didn't do that. What he wanted was not the paper man, but the mastermind behind the paper man. If the paper man is gone, the murderer can continue to make a new one. Destroying a paper man is meaningless to Subai. As for why the paper man must return to his master in this state, it is a kind of is it an instinctive reaction, or is it just a storyline given by the horror broadcast? If Subai was the murderer and his paper man missed it, he would probably cut off the connection between himself and the paper man and let the paper man fend for itself instead of letting it lead him to find him. Of course, it may be that the murderer also has an unspeakable secret, or that the murderer lost the ability to continue remote control after releasing the paper man, and could only make the paper man act according to his prior instructions. Finally, on the third floor, the paper man stuck to the ground and got in under the door of the dormitory. First his feet went in, and finally his head. Before entering with his head, he looked at Subai who was following him. After the blush on his face was soaked in blood, it became even more weird. Subai stood at the door, his face full of disbelief. It's him. At this time, a voice suddenly sounded in Subai's mind. Main mission 2 has been completed. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 19. Psycho, I'm impressed by you. You actually sat down to eat barbecue after seeing the corpse like that. It seems like being a psycho is pretty good. To be honest, I'm a little envious of you. Mental illness, not neurosis. Subai corrected Chu Zayadao. Oh, actually they're almost the same. Chu Zhao picked up a bunch of grilled leeks in front of Subai. I've stayed up all night, eat some leeks to replenish my body. I'm not married yet, don't get sunburned by staying up late. If you are impotent, then it won't be worth it. Isn't that the best revenge you can have on your father? The revenge will be on his grandchildren. Hey, I have really thought about your suggestion before. When my dad forced me to become a policeman, I even thought about putting a knife to my balls, and then threatened him and said that you are forcing me to become a policeman. I just be rude to your grandson. After Chu Zhao finished speaking, he laughed too, then picked up the beer on the table and took a big sip. Drinking was not allowed when performing tasks, but he had been busy all night, and the superiors would not take this too seriously. Harsh, of course, Chu Zhao himself is used to going his own way, and he does not follow the rules. Subai looked at Chu Zhao. He knew who the murderer was, but he couldn't really tell the friend in front of him because all this was very unreasonable. What are you going to do next? What else can we do? Continue the investigation. People from above will be sent for reinforcements. 2 students died in an extremely miserable and abnormal way. This is already a shock. The provincial government has been alerted and has issued a special order. Documents, and let me tell you, some veteran police officers who participated in the investigation of the XX corpse case 20 years ago, who were retired at home, have also been recruited to assist in the investigation. Chu Zhao finished a leak, then stood up and said, I'll take you back to the dormitory. Why, are you worried that I'm not safe alone? No, you don't seem to be in a good mental state. Your face is a bit too pale. What's with the black lines under your eyes? Hearing Chu Zhao's words, Subai immediately picked up the phone and pointed the screen at himself. Soon, he found something wrong. His face seemed to be a little too pale. Fortunately, in the dark night, it wouldn't be he was seen very clearly, and there were actually very obvious black lines on his lips and around his eyes, which were a bit like lines created during makeup. Subai knew that this was definitely related to the broken vampire blood that he had redeemed before. That blood had already affected his body. At the same time, Subai also felt that his body seemed to become lighter, and there are some indescribable feelings that I can't fully understand for the time being. Fortunately, when Subai observed it himself, he found that his skin color was slowly recovering and those lines were gradually fading. It should be that my body was still a little uncomfortable when I first redeemed it, but now it is gradually recovering. Subai stood up, put the money on the table, then looked at Chu Zhao, and finally reached out and patted Chu Zhao on the shoulder. "Thank you for your hard work, the people's good policeman." Chu Zhao really had no intention of teasing or bragging with Subai at this time. He just said, "Seriously, why don't you stay at my place for one night and go to the hospital for a checkup tomorrow? Even if there is nothing wrong with your body, I'm really afraid that your mental side will be stimulated by the two things today, and then, well, you know. Will not." Drunk people usually say they are not drunk. Chu Zhao looked at Subai like this: "There are 4 of us in the club. The 3 of us are here for excitement and weirdness. Only you, a pervert, just need it? Okay, come with me back to the dormitory to get some things. I'll start suspending school tomorrow." "That's right. It doesn't matter whether you go to school or not." "Okay, now we're waiting for the support team to come over. I'm free right now, so I'll accompany you back to the dormitory first." Subai and Chu Zhao walked back to the school together. There were many police cars parked at the school gate, creating a chilling and depressing atmosphere. "Will this case be sealed?" Subai suddenly asked at this time. "It's very difficult, but I will try my best. Now everyone has a smartphone, and this time so many students have been mobilized to help with the search. This matter has probably caused a lot of noise on the internet, but let's wait for the announcement from the internet. It's actually very simple. It may seem like a big turmoil, but as long as you use a clamping method, everything will calm down immediately." On their way back to Subai's dormitory, Subai and Chu Zhao saw many students and police searching. Obviously, a lot of meat pieces were found, but in other aspects, there was no progress. Chu Zhao lit a cigarette and handed one to Subai. Subai pursed his lips. In front of the dormitory building, Subai asked Chu Zhao to wait below. Chu Zhao did not doubt that he was there and was happy to have him. "If I'm too lazy to go upstairs, I'll just smoke and enjoy the air below." However, Chu Zhao soon discovered something was wrong. He touched himself. It's gone." Subai walked up to the dormitory building. The dormitory was not peaceful at this time. There were many people walking around, because this incident had gone viral on the internet, even if the relevant departments warned several media outlets, such as Weibo, etc. Several major media outlets also deleted this topic, but as real students in this school, it inevitably caused huge panic among them. However, no matter how heated the discussions were in other dormitories, Subai's own dormitory would still remain calm. Because there are very few people in this dormitory, Luhi is probably the only one in the dormitory now. There were originally 4 people in the dormitory, one of whom was doing an internship outside the school at the beginning of this semester. Chen Chuye and his girlfriend were renting a house off campus. There were usually Subai and the cold-tempered Luhi in the dormitory. Now, only Luhi was left. Subai opened the door of the dormitory and walked in. He saw Luhi curled up on the bed like a frightened little white rabbit. Luhi watched Subai walk in and said, "Subai, I can't sleep." Subai nodded, "I can't sleep either. It's hard to imagine that Chen Chu died like this." Tears began to fill Luhi's eyes. Subai sat down on Chen Chu's bed. Chen Chu's bed happened to be on the lower bunk with Luhi's bed, so they were facing each other. "It's hard for me to imagine." Subai agreed. "I want to take a break from school." Luhi seemed to have made a very important decision. "I will call my father tomorrow. I want to take a break from school. Otherwise, if you let me continue in this dormitory, no, let me continue in this school, I would feel crazy." Luhi actually started crying as he spoke. His mental endurance seemed to be far worse than Subai's. "Just take a break from school." "I'm going to take a break from school too, otherwise I'll go crazy." This was indeed Subai's plan. After encountering the terrorist broadcast, it was difficult for him to continue to go to school safely. He had lost the mentality of studying, so he might as well give himself a holiday. If he, like Guo Gang, dies inexplicably in the story in the future, everything he does now seems to have little meaning. Louis stood up. By the way, I have some pears here, do you want to eat them? Okay, Subai nodded. Well, I'm going to wash up. Let's go to bed early today. We'll go to school together tomorrow. I think the school won't let us get stuck if something like this happens. Actually, if we had a tougher attitude, the school might even give us guarantees. Do you still care about a graduate student? Louis said with a smile, and then he walked out. Obviously, like Chen Chu, he also knew that Subai's family conditions were unusual. Louis walked out of the dormitory and went to the toilet to wash pears. Subai stood up, walked to Louis's bedside, opened the mosquito net, and then rubbed his hands on Louis's bed. He only found things like toilet water, tissue paper, and nothing else. Subai simply turned over the mat. Come over, then he froze. Under the mat, there lies a flat paper figure. The paper figure is 1 meter 6 long. Bright blush. On the finger of one hand of the paper man, there is a knife made of paper. The pears are washed, do you want to eat them now? Suddenly, Louis's voice sounded from behind Subai. The voice seemed a bit hollow and quiet. In the new book issue, Xiao Long is here to ask everyone for recommendation votes, clicks, collections, and Hug the Dragon. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Xiao Long. Chapter 20. Eat, of course. Subai turned around with a smile, took the pear from Louis's hand, and took a bite immediately. The pear was good, very sweet and refreshing, and the juice was very rich. What are you doing on my bed? Louis asked calmly, just like his usual character, who seemed not to know how to get angry at all. Out of curiosity, look through it to see if there are any celebrity photos below you, Subai replied, but Subai didn't take it seriously when explaining. Anyway, he saw it all, and the rest was nothing more than perfunctory. Louis looked at Subai seriously, then took a bite of the pear. The pears were crisp and he was satisfied. While chewing the pear, Louis turned sideways, pointed at the paper man placed under his mat, and smiled. It didn't scare you, did it? A bit, Subai replied, but in the world of horror radio stories, this one is even scarier. Immediately afterwards, Subai sat down next to Louis's bed. Go to school, what are you going to do with this? My family used to make paper figurines. My grandfather and grandma both did this. My father and mother also made paper figurines. They used the money they earned from paper figurines to support me in school and college. So, I don't have the fear and taboo that ordinary people have towards paper figures. On the contrary, I feel very kind to them, as if they are my friends, so I am used to taking them with me wherever I go. However, after all, the paper man cannot be placed outside, so I had to put it under the bed, otherwise it would be my fault to scare you. Subai nodded, so that's it? With that said, Subai stood up. Louis looked at Subai with a faint smile on his lips. Do you know Chen Chu's girlfriend? Lu Hegong swallowed a mouthful of pears, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and then sat down beside Chen Chu's bed. Why do you ask? At this time, Louis actually showed another kind of temperament. Yes, another kind of temperament. He was no longer the kind of good-natured person who was afraid of getting into trouble. He seemed a little, too calm. The whole person looked like, somewhat profound. Just curious, Subai replied. No, it's not out of curiosity. Subai, you know, our classmates, including me and Chen Chu, can all guess that your family's background is definitely not ordinary, so you have always been very distant from us. I know that this is not because you deliberately look down on others, but because of your identity and starting point, there is really no need to get too entangled with us. Moreover, we really don't get to hang out together. You are actually quite a nice person, I can feel it, but the word friend of a friend is just two strings of money. If you are not equal in terms of money and status, you cannot be considered a friend. Therefore, I know that you will not care about my and Chen Chu's personal affairs for no reason. You are not such a boring and gossipy person. Just tell me the truth, what do you know? Lu He continued to take another bite of the pear, but this time, his teeth obviously exerted a lot of force when chewing, and they also made more obvious sounds when chewing. I don't know, but I have a feeling Subai supported his chin with one hand and put the other hand on his waist, as if he had chosen a posture that made him feel comfortable talking. Oh? How does it feel? You give me this feeling now. Subai looked into Lu He's eyes. Lu He put Li's eye aside. I don't know what you are talking about. Really, I am also very sad about Chen Chu and his girlfriend. After all, they are my classmates and alumni, and, indeed, they died tragically. Subai shook his head. Paper figures, in your eyes, are very beautiful things, right? Lu He didn't know why Subai suddenly changed his subject here, but he nodded anyway. They gave me a very friendly feeling. In other words, they are also your relatives. It's a bit too much to say family, but it's no exaggeration to say they're friends. I grew up with paper figures since I was a child. When my grandparents, my parents, and they were building paper figures, I would play in the field. It is those paper figures that accompany me to play and grow up with. Every time I see the paper figures being sent to be burned, I feel very sad. To me, they have flesh and blood and thoughts. They are no different from humans. I felt sad to let them be burned and go underground to serve other unrelated dead people. I even felt guilty for not protecting my friends. Hearing this, Subai stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. So, since they are your friends, why do you let your friends help you kill people and do those bloody things? Lu He put the pears on Chen Chu's bed, leaned back, and sank into the mosquito net on Chen Chu's bed. His voice came with a little airiness. You still know? Yes, Subai nodded. I used to think you were a pretty nice person. I am indeed a very good person. Anyone who can be friends with a paper man can never be that bad. Lu He's voice became more and more faint, as if he was not sitting on Chen Chu's bed opposite Subai, but it is hidden in a bottomless darkness. Next, are you going to say no? Subai continued. But, haha, but there are some things that a man cannot bear. Lu He's voice finally began to fluctuate gradually. Obviously, some things now were irritating his nerves. Rong was originally my girlfriend. He, Chen Chu, snatched her away, and then sent me photos of Rong giving him a blowjob every night. She also showed off to me when chatting in the dormitory, time and time again. Again and again. Chen Chu even sent me the video of them doing that kind of thing together on QQ and WeChat. Subai took a deep breath. To be honest, he didn't know much about these things. For him, the dormitory was just a place to rest. His personality was indeed not to interact with the people in the dormitory, but he didn't expect it. There is actually a love triangle in my dormitory. So, he has to die. And in this way, including your ex-girlfriend? Subai asked. Haha, Subai, are you qualified to speak against me? Lu He suddenly laughed. Subai, are you really qualified to speak against me? Subai's face immediately became serious, because he thought of other things. If Lu He was not as good-natured and dull as he thought before, then he might really be the clues he left in the dormitory. It's possible to find out? My paper man told me that there is blood in you, and even resentment around you. It is the breath of the dead, and it is the kind of breath that is only released at the last moment from a killed person. Subai, you are a young man, a college student, and your major does not require you to come into contact with those macroscopic teachers. Even the corpses of the macroscopic teachers used as specimens for study in the school have been touched by so many students that they have no feeling at all. There will be no such resentment. Tell me, Subai, what on earth did you do? Louhi's voice contained a hint of ridicule. Subai was silent. When Louhi saw that Subai had stopped talking, he continued. This means that you have killed people, and you have killed people recently, and you have killed more than one person. I am very curious, Subai, why does a young man from a well-off family like you need to kill people so frequently? What happened to you? Moreover, you definitely killed more than 2 people, so you know what I mean, don't you? What qualifications do you have to question me here? You are wrong, or your paper brother has deceived you. A more suitable reason is that you have become a psychopath, Subai said, and he could talk to those people in the club at any time. There are some scruples, but Subai will not admit those things to outsiders, because it is not necessary, and it is also because of an instinctive self-protection mechanism. The paper man will not deceive me. No one knows loyalty and friendship better than the paper man. Louhi seemed to have lost interest in continuing to beat around the bush and said directly, you came to me because what? Report me? Expose me? Or, some other purpose? I'm very interested in metaphysics, Subai said. To be honest, I don't have much interest in reporting you or exposing you. Oh, I see, it's easy to say. I can give you what you want. After all, this is not the ancient times, and it is not the era of shameless self-preservation. There are some things that cannot be shared. Of course, I believe you can also give sufficient money and other material conditions. Louhi agreed simply. Money is not a problem. As long as you can give me what I want, as for money, just ask, Subai answered simply. However, at this moment, Subai was sitting on Louhi's bed. The paper figure that was originally hidden under Louhi's mat slowly sat up and sat behind Subai. The paper knife in his hand, exuding a breathtaking cold light, the paper man's blush is so rich and rich that it makes people feel suffocated. The paper knife was slowly raised. With a strange and cold atmosphere. In the new week, Horror Broadcast needs to hit the new book list. Xiaolong is here to ask for your support, recommend, click, collect, reward, and hold long together. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Xiaolong. Chapter 21. Boom. There is something better than a paper man's knife. Faster. That's the bullet. In the Terror Broadcast story, everything is amplified. For example, the dead female white-collar worker turned into something similar to a zombie. The paper man before was very scary. The speed and destructive power of the scissors were sharper and sharper than bullets. However, this is not the story world of horror broadcasts, but the real world. Therefore, although the paper man is scary, it is actually much weaker than in the story world. It is definitely not that scary and definitely not that perverted. Subai can be sure of this. Subai had put one hand in his pocket, but he was actually pointing the gun in front of him, pointing at the man sitting on the bunk opposite him. It was impossible for Subai not to be wary of a guy who could kill 2 people in such a cruel way. Moreover, the people Louhi killed were his roommate and his ex-girlfriend, not passerby A and passerby B. Plop. Louhi rolled down Chen Chu's bed. He was lying on the ground, with a bullet hole in his chest bleeding profusely. The paper man behind him, who had planned to use scissors on Subai, also slumped down at this time. Turned into an ordinary paper man. Subai stood up and walked to Louhi. You actually carry a gun, Louhi said speechlessly, and then showed a sad smile, and blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. I just got it from a friend. I can't help it. Facing you, I feel really weak. At this time, the dormitory door was pushed open. Subai thought it was Chu Zhao who found out that his gun was touched by him and hurriedly came up, or the other dormitory students heard the gunfire and ran over, but what came in was Gong Zihe. Gong Zihai's thick oblique bangs were constantly rising and falling at this time. He was breathing heavily, and he was obviously coming at a very fast speed. Behind him, several fireflies had turned red. Then it exploded. Puff. 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 A muffled sound came out. You are crazy. You fired a gun in the dormitory. Do you have the ability to deal with the world now? I don't even have this ability. Gong Zihai was obviously very dissatisfied with Sudbai's actions, but Sudbai also understood. Gong Zihai, who hurried over, used his ability to help him suppress the sound effects of the shot just now. Otherwise, Sudbai stood up and looked at young Master Hai, waiting for you to come over and kill. Gong Zihai looked at Sudbai with some surprise. You know everything. Sudbai shook his head. I don't know much, but one thing is that if I kill him in the real world, I can get extra points on the horror broadcast, at least impression points. Haha, this is indeed the temper of the broadcaster. Gong Zihai has a bit of a weird temper. He said he was very angry at Sudbai for doing this, but now he seems very calm. Actually, I believe that even if you don't help me suppress the gunfire, I won't have any problems killing him, Sudbai continued. Gong Zihai touched the tip of his nose and squatted next to Lu He's body. After confirming that Lu He was indeed dead, he stopped talking nonsense and stood up directly to start rummaging on Lu He's bed. How could there be nothing? Tisk, tisk, I thought I met a metaphysics disciple in the real world and expected to find something, but in the end I didn't even have the lowest level magic weapon. Gong Zihai looked a little depressed. He shouldn't be controlling the paper man through things like you did before. He himself is a psychic person, Sudbai said. By himself and the paper man, he has a mysterious connection. Rely on external things. So, he is really a talent. Gong Zihai looked at Lu He lying in a pool of blood and shook his head with some pity. It's a pity, it's really a pity. If a person like this is selected as a listener of a horror broadcast, he will definitely take off like a bug. But it was shot to pieces by you right here. Does a terrorist broadcast want this kind of person? Sudbai asked, a murderer. When asking this question, Sudbai suddenly thought that he seemed to be a murderer too, and he had killed more people than Lu He. However, the people he killed were all guilty, but they were not guilty enough to die. Don't think that horror broadcast is just after experiencing two experiential stories. He is not Zhong Kui or a judge. It is just an entertainment program, a horror entertainment program. We are just walk-ons in the program. We can do it at any time. A certain atmosphere or plot needs to be sacrificed by us, haha, there are simply too many perverted guys in the audience, and even those who were not perverted before will become perverted after entering the story a few times. Sudbai listened and nodded. What other rules are there for broadcasting? Sudbai asked. For example, in reality, you are not allowed to kill people casually, and you are not allowed to attack people who are also in the audience casually. Haha, that's true, Gong Zihai nodded. In reality, it doesn't mean that you can't kill people, but if you kill innocent people too indiscriminately, or kill people without reason, you will be included in the next broadcast in vain. In the story of the period, a special person will enter the story to kill you, and then you who die in the story will also die in reality, and die in a very natural way, without causing any harm to anyone. Suspicion. In reality, it is more taboo to attack listeners than to attack ordinary people, unless there is really deep hatred between each other. In fact, sometimes broadcasters are very reasonable. What about in the story? Sudbai continued to ask. The restrictions in the story are actually easier than in reality. The audience can take action at will without destroying the plot. Of course, the prerequisite is that it does not destroy the plot. You were tricked by those two guys into renting a house before because they didn't dare to use force on you for the time being. Because you are obviously a participant in this story. You are both the audience and the original participant in this story. So they are a bit wary of you, and they dare not say that they will just arrest you. So, when I entered the rental house, they immediately attacked me. Was it because I had no influence on the plot at that time? That's right, because they calculated the time wrongly. In fact, we, the audience, have investigated this case before, so we have the general details and information, but those two idiots still calculated the time wrongly. Did the wrong thing at the wrong time, and also tried to take action against you, a character who should not have died at that time. Then the consequences are very simple. The paper man appeared directly, because it was not just the right time, so only one hand showed up, but it was more than enough. What about you? Subai looked at Gong Zihai. Gong Zihai narrowed his eyes slightly and shrugged. I calculated the time correctly. At that time, under the premise that Chen Chu and her girlfriend were dead, a classic part of the story was already over. Next, there is no such thing as whether the plot changes or not, because we, the audience, have become the bearers of the story, and we ourselves have become the supporting characters in the story to continue the story. At this time, Gong Zihai looked at the corpse again and smiled at Subai. Now, I can take you to witness the scary part of the terrorist broadcast. Since this guy has been written into the story of the terrorist broadcast, then, killing him and executing him in reality is also a category of real-life horror broadcast tasks. Story points will not be rewarded, but as you guessed, you can indeed get some impression points. The role of impression points is to in this story world, I will treat you better. Gong Zihai opened the dormitory door and motioned for Subai to follow him out. The dormitory door was wide open, and the lights in the dormitory were also on. At this time, a student who got up to go to the toilet came over. He seemed to completely ignore Subai and Gong Zihai. When passing by the dormitory, he looked inside and let out a piercing scream. Immediately afterwards, the entire dormitory building was alarmed. The dormitory ant also came up. Even Chu Zhao came. Chu Zhao rushed into the dormitory to check and immediately shouted, "I'm having a heart attack. I'm in shock. Go call 120 and notify someone." Subai watched helplessly as Chu Zhao carried Lu He out. There were still traces of bullet holes on Lu He's body, but his lips were blue, his face was pale, and his hands and feet were already cold. Taking out the pistol, Subai opened the magazine and was shocked to find that the bullet that had just killed Lu He was still inside. Not a single bullet was missing in it. Gong Zihai put his face next to Subai's shoulder and said quietly, "Do you think it's scary? Because the day you become a listener, your whole being, it's like being completely stripped away from this world." The new book is on the list. Xiao Long is here to ask for your recommendation votes, clicks and hugs.